Welcome to Executive Conversations by the Paypers. I'm Dwayne Gefferie. In this episode, I'm joined by Andre Ferraz, CEO of Incognia, and Joe Wilson, board member at bunq. And we're going to be talking a little bit about fraud, especially APP fraud. So, Andre, I want to start with you. Maybe in plain terms, for those who don't know, what is APP fraud and why is it different from fraud that most bank professionals already know how to stop?
All right. Well, so APP fraud stands for Authorized Push Payment fraud. So basically, it's the kind of fraud in which the end user is convinced to move money, thinking that they're trying to protect their funds or something like that. So it's usually related to social engineering scams in which a scammer would call them and say, for example, like, "Oh, I work for the bank. There's something wrong with your account, and I need you to send money to this secure account here so that you don't lose your money." And then that secure account was actually the account of the fraudster, right? So the end user logged into their bank account from their device, probably went through some form of biometrics or MFA, right? Authenticated to their account, did the transaction, and then they realized, oh, I sent the money to the wrong person. It wasn't the bank. It was a scammer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Joe, of course, working at a bunq, right? You see a lot of those different type of interactions. You see what's happening when it comes to fraud, and this is, of course, a fraud that's been on the rise. But when that customer authorizes the payment, as Andre already mentioned, like the normal fraud book playbook will probably does not fire, right? How did this change the way that a bank like bunq is actually approaching this and trying to solve it?
Yeah, by the way, thanks for the initial Dutch pronunciation of the word bunq. Look, I think maybe your question is like how we evolved or what do we do now, because these things are on the rise and progressing. He refers to it in a really good way. I think of it as this dark art of convincing people, right? They do this. I think there's things you have to put in place, right? You have to take your time and energy and you need to focus it not just on the back end systems and catching things after they happen, but you have to start to focus out forward, like when it could happen, where might it happen, how do you educate people? We have a feature that we recently implemented called Safety Shield, which basically we run a constant scan against your patterns and your behaviors. And then when we see something that's out of the ordinary or above a threshold you might normally do, we might freeze that for 24 hours and give you a chance for a second thought on some of those and even announce it to you and let you know. So that's one example. I'm not saying it's the perfect all answer, but those are the types of things we have to start doing now. I think we have a responsibility in that trust relationship to try and put technology to work even out at the human error side where we can.
Absolutely. So I think maybe Andre, to help the audience maybe get a better size of this, right? Like how big is the APP fraud? How big is it? How fast has it grown? And what moved so that this can actually happen?
Yeah, I'd say right now, I don't have exact figures, but I would estimate like in the hundreds of billions per year across the entire financial services industry. And one of the key challenges is that right now, this is, for many financial institutions, the top fraud issue. And a lot of regulators, for example, are currently discussing like what to do, right? Who should be liable? Is it the receiving end, the sending end of the transaction, for example? So there's a lot of discussion right now in multiple jurisdictions about who's responsible for this and who should be liable. So yeah, major problem, and one that the industry hasn't really found a really solid solution.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned liability, right? I think we see the liability aspect, especially in this particular fraud. Who's actually responsible? Like, do you already have an answer to that, or is it still a debate between it's either the bank or the customer?
Yeah, I want to know this.
There's a debate, right? There are some places, like I think the UK, for example, currently has the receiving end of the transaction being liable. And basically that's because like on that side of the transaction, it's kind of the bank didn't really run proper KYC to ensure that account was being used by the right person. So that account is probably a mule account or a fake account that's receiving those funds. So they're being held liable. In other places, you have the other side being liable. I don't know which approach is best, to be honest. There are other places that are discussing having both sides being partially liable, and in other areas, no one is liable. It's like,
Depends on the country there. That's a country-based answer too as well, right?
yeah. So, I mean, it's still open discussion right now. I don't think there's a perfect model, but in the end, like there are multiple parties involved in this. Like in some places, there's even discussion about, like, for example, having the social media companies being liable and for some of this, because it's like, oh, the conversation originated on social media and it led to this kind of scam, etc. Which I think it's probably a bit too far, in my opinion. But it has to be like more in between, like the financial institutions, and probably having the financial institution like sharing more intelligence so that they can like identify and block these scam networks.
Absolutely. And I believe it's in the UK where actually banks are actually responsible for paying back
Yes, they have to reimburse.
the reimbursement. So maybe, Joe, that for you then, when you look at that, do you think that paying back victims sounds right? Or does it just guarantee that reimbursement risk makes people much more less careful, basically?
I think I got to separate liability and responsibility. And I know they sound kind of similar, but I want to split the hair a little bit, because in a sense, I think we're both sides of this quite responsible. Like we as an institution, a banking institution, is responsible to educate people on what this is, what the risk is. I mean, I'll give you a very basic cultural example. Go to my LinkedIn, go look at my picture. You'll see my picture, but behind my picture, you're going to see a banner, and it looks like the bunq banner. Read the words, and it's going to say, "Bunq will never call you."
Well,
So it's that basic. The first day you start in our company, you basically get this package that if you're going to announce anything, if you're going to represent yourself on LinkedIn, you have to put that up. So it's every employee. So you're just trying to make you, as a company, you have a set of cultures. So we're responsible. That's a very simple one, right? But we're also responsible to basically say, look, if this looks weird, we should tell you. You might still say, no, I want to do this anyway. Right? I still, yes. I might make you say yes 40 times. And so then I'm slicing responsibility and liability. But I do think we have a responsibility to educate. We have a responsibility to use technology to prevent and to sort of put up some blockers. And also the KYC thing is really important. I can tell you the IBAN doesn't match the name of the person that you're sending it to, right? But you might still want to send it. So there is those two things. So do I think that I don't have a hard answer to that, and I don't think I want to publicly decide for the world what that answer is, but I do think we should look at that at least in more than one direction.
absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. I think there's one thing, and that's maybe from a personal anecdote, where I think it might be a little bit overbearing, is when, just as an example, I was trying to move some money to somebody else, but I was on the phone with the person, and then my entire accounts got shut down, right? Just for the fact that I moved some money. I still answer to all of the questions, but then still my whole account got shut down. And I think that might be a little bit too overbearing as well, and I think a lot of consumers might agree with that. Have you had any pushback on that, or are you even utilizing those technologies?
So, I mean, anything that has an element of anti-fraud to it, especially the sort of agentic AI components where you can go and sort of try and find these things before they happen. Yes, we'll utilize those technologies. We really use them deeply in that space. Have we had pushback from people where we held up a transaction because we thought that it had suspicion to it? Yeah. And we have. Like, it happened to me. I mean, I was booking a holiday house, right? And it was out of whatever my normal patterns were, and my payment got frozen by bunq. And I was like, what? But then, it wasn't something that had to be done within 24 hours. Once 24 hours was over, which is the safety shield I mentioned, it was fine. So I didn't mind it. I'd rather have the protection than to have the problem. So for me, it was okay. But yeah, we see, I mean, all sides of this conversation, I promise you, from a user perspective, we are seeing.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great to see. So maybe you can take us, Andre, maybe you can take us through a scam, right? Like, let's say I'm a victim on that side from start to finish. What makes a normal, careful person actually hand over money in a case like an APP scam?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. So let's walk through a scenario of this particular scam taking place, right? From start to finish. What makes a normal, careful person who always think that they're pretty well secure, they know their passwords, they know how to work with that. What makes them actually hand over money at this case?
Yeah, I'd say the key thing that fraudsters do in those cases is to put the victim in a like psychological situation in which they become a lot more vulnerable. So for example, they would try to attack your weak spots. So for example, there's the classic scam of like people find your picture in social media, try to identify like family members, create a phone number, reach out to you on a chat app like WhatsApp, for example, and say like, hey mom, I need some money, got a new number, can you help me, right? That puts that mom in the emotional state in which they're like, oh, I need to protect my child. I need to help him. And they don't think like, oh, is this the right person, right? Like they maybe don't think like, should I call my son to identify if this is real, right? No, the emotional state in which the fraudster puts that person in forces them to do things much more quickly and being like a lot more reactive, for example. Another one is the bank impersonation scam, right? Which the bank would call you, not the bank, right? But they would spoof the phone number to make it look like the bank's number, but maybe the area code is likely different. If you search on Google, for example, for that phone number, you're gonna see that, oh yes, that is the right number from my bank. And then they start guiding you through all this story about like your account is compromised, we're here to help you, and they have all this like verbiage to make it look like they're serious and they really represent the bank. So they're again putting you in that emotional state that in which you're concerned and you're going to do whatever they ask you to do. So basically they try to exploit those things and those weak spots in users, and it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
So it's not like 100% conversion. They're probably going to call like 500 people during a day and scam like 20. But if they're able to make a lot of money from each individual transaction, that's a pretty good business for them, right? So I'd say it's a mix of putting the end user in an emotional state in which they're vulnerable plus a numbers game.
Absolutely.
Can I add to it? Please, I. So Andre's doing a great job covering the space. I think the thing to remember here is that we're in an arms race, a technology arms race when it comes to the how this is being done. Let's take his example of, your son. You think it may be your son calling you. What the fraudster has done is they've taken these low cost, no cost AI tools. They've gone online. They've gone through the Instagram accounts. They found out who your son is. They've recorded their voice off of videos that they posted for 20, 30, 40 times. They then recreated that voice and put it through the phone. And then they've called you from this number, or they've contacted you through Instagram on an account that sort of looks very similar to what your son's looks like, and maybe even took their photos and put them up there. And now you're doing your best to check these things out. But like, again, the emotional state, the panic, the energy, the fear that gets put in place is where you're getting a hold. So you have to be able to somehow in that moment be like, well, hold on. Wait. To know, first off, they have to realize that possibility of it being that close and being that sophisticated exists at an incredibly low barrier to entry right now. I mean, companies like his exist because this barrier to entry, they have to fight this all the time. We have to fight this. So that's why I tend to call this an arms race.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, like if you just look back a couple of years ago, just spotting an email, right, like had a bunch of,
you see who it's from. You see who it's from.
See who it's from. It's coming from a Gmail account. It had misspellings in it, and indeed, now you're absolutely right. Is that the level of sophistication of trying to imitate or trying to be that person, and then adding on the psychological aspect of it as well, right? Putting you in a state of fear or having to react at that moment. Those two combined can be a dangerous combination. So is it even fair to look at it and say, hey, we're just common sense, or my gut is going to protect me? You need solutions basically out of that.
I mean, it works because it works, right? They know that.
So I'll give you one example on that, on how like smart these fraudsters are when they're trying to impersonate any company. There was one scam in which the fraudsters were impersonating Microsoft's support, and they bought this domain, which was not really Microsoft. It was RN Microsoft. And if you type it and you don't look carefully, it looks like Microsoft. That's an always say already, and yeah. So when you were reading that email, it's like, oh yeah, Microsoft sent me an email. I'm gonna click.
That's legit.
And so they really think through everything to make it look legit.
Absolutely. So banks, of course, run awareness programs all the time, right? Like in the Netherlands, you had the 3 times knocking, and then you had to go through different checks, of course. And in the UK, you have different ones. In the US, they run different programs as well, and they help, but they do have a limit. So where does education stop working once somebody is, like you mentioned, emotionally manipulated into that particular moment?
I think there's a couple of things. First, I think you have to know, I think as a bank, technology company with a banking license, you need to be clear. First off, we focus on a particular audience. That audience is quite tech savvy. That doesn't give them any greater defenses, by the way. But we also have to position and message what it is that we stand for, what we do and what we don't do. So this thing that I mentioned about LinkedIn, like this whole, like that is constant message that comes out of us, right? We will never call you under any circumstances. We will ever call you. So when you can establish that relationship as truth, you can sort of start to rely on it. I would say just beginning. So there's a little bit of like basic. Let's start with basic things. Where do we go from there? Well, then you have to start to employ technology, right? You have to assume that people will make mistakes, and you have to assume that they will do these things that Andre describes. That will happen. So then what can you do? I mentioned things like Safety Shield. There's other methods. This is where the arms race is on the positive side. Like the good guys are going after this with technology to sort of prevent it and see it as soon as possible and early as possible. Maybe we can give you a chance to take it back when you realize you've made a mistake. Maybe we can work with you on those things. Maybe we can go find them and get this solved. Like there's ways that we can partner together. As an industry, I actually would argue that if we were to connect a bit better and sort of think of this as not just my problem or your problem or their problem, but everybody's problem that's sort of harming the industry, we probably could even get a greater ability, a greater defense going. I don't know exactly what that looks like, so I'm not going to articulate. Andre might have a better, clear picture of that, but I do think that there's a way that we could anonymously share more that would create a larger conjoined defense that we don't necessarily do, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, it does. And one of the things we're doing in some markets where we have like a very strong penetration is we are enabling financial institutions to exchange data through our platform so that they're able to identify, especially mule accounts, which is like usually what's used to receive the funds from these scams, right? So whenever there is a transaction and we have visibility into the receiving end and we're able to say like, this is a mule account, we've seen it before, they're going to stop the transaction right there. And we're able to do this without ever sharing any PII between financial institutions, because
basically anonymous, but it's a fact.
Exactly. Yeah. So the reason why like not sharing PII is important is because prior to this, the banks were like, no, I'm not going to share like my customers like personal information, because then this other bank can use that data and advertise to these people and steal my customer, right? But if we're just saying like, okay, this is a mule account and that's it, and they have the visibility into who they're sending to, but that's it, just for that specific account, then they feel a lot more comfortable sharing the kind of information. So embedding this into a like privacy preserving way is probably the best way to enable this kind of data sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and look, especially in the fraud space, if you go look at it, you go search for solutions as a financial institution or as a bank, there's already plenty of tools, right? Like there's a number of different tools that are actually trying to fix fraud overall. Why is looking at the signals around APP fraud so interesting? And why is there a different approach that can actually help solve this?
Yeah, well, the tricky part about APP fraud is that if you look at the traditional signals, everything is going to look fine, right? You're authenticated to your account, you use your credentials, it's the device that you typically use. You're probably at a trusted location. You're probably connected to your home Wi-Fi, something like that, right? So at a high level, everything looks fine. What's unusual, and these are the other signals that we try to focus on, are things like, is this user actively on a call? Is there any kind of like remote access tool being used at that moment? Is this a new payee? Is the like transaction, like is it too big compared to the normal transactions that this user typically does? When you see all these factors, that's a red flag. But then if you're able to analyze the receiving end of the transaction and verify like this is a mule account, then you're like 100% sure this is APP fraud. So this last mile here, I'd say, is the most important. The others are like important signals, but the last one is really when you nail it.
Absolutely.
In his description, one of the elements that we're spending more time on is that moment of the call. So we are encouraging any user who is on a call, actively on a call, and unsure, to get in the app, customer support right now. Get a user support, contact us instantly, and we will walk you through how to check and test and walk this thing, and even whether you should or shouldn't do this, we will move it. So we're looking at that moment, because the more that we can stop before it happens, of course, the better it will be. The backward signals of what happened are useful, and you will use them, and the technology will help inform other things, but they're not as good as the moment of a bad thing happening where you can prevent it from happening.
Absolutely. And you mentioned mule accounts several times, right? I think maybe for those who are not as familiar with what a mule account is, what is a mule account, and why does catching it depend on banks working together?
Yeah, so it's a very challenging issue, because the mule account is basically the one that's used by the fraudster, and the fraudster is not going to use their own information, right? So they're basically like convincing other people to give them access to their accounts, and usually they're paying these people, or they're coercing these people to give their accounts. And the tricky part about it is that during the onboarding stage, during the KYC, everything looks fine because it's the actual person creating that account. But then they transfer that account to the fraudster. They even like give their credentials, or even like give the device that has access to that account. And then that fraudster starts using that account going forward, right? So the tricky part is identifying that handover process, because most of the verification happens at the account opening stage, not continuously. So the way in which many financial institutions are evolving now is that they're starting to continuously verify this account over time versus just at the front door. So this is how you would identify this kind of behavior, and particularly identifying the behavior of the device that uses that account versus the behavior of the device that opened that account in the first place. If those behaviors don't match, the likelihood that this is a new account is extremely high. And then there's a second layer to it, which is if you're able to identify that the second device is associated to other accounts or other devices, then you identify what we call the device farm. And this is where there's a high concentration of accounts. So to give an example, we had a financial institution that was testing this capability, and we were able to find in a single apartment 200 devices that were connected to 4,500 accounts.
So wait, 200 devices that were connecting to 4,500 accounts.
Exactly.
Wow. All in one place, and you were able to detect that.
Yeah, in a single apartment.
Very interesting. So
Not apartment building, but apartment.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he's saying. Like, someone could track the electric power usage of that apartment. You would know you get the heat signal coming out of that, right?
yeah, absolutely. Well, and then bunq, of course, being a digital only bank, you don't have any locations in it.
No.
So the device is actually the customer's
Device.
and the contact person.
It could also be a business device. Both are
Could also
also
be.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could have a user that has a personal account in the business on one device, or you could have multiple devices
You could. Yes.
as one. So how are you using the information that you're gathering, of course, when it comes to preventing yourselves from those mule accounts or those mule account takeovers?
Yeah, I think one of the we put out an annual report just in the last few days, so there's some good data in there if you want to check it for the facts behind the conversation. And one of the big areas of focus was the preventing the incoming fraud, right? So that's coming in, and we've been able to reduce that by something. I had to look at the number. I think it's the 80% in a lot. So we're reducing that coming in. Part of that is that you are running a constant again, agentic component or an AI component on the behavioral patterns, if you will, the stats. I mean, I can use it in whatever term you find most comfortable, but I mean, like, you're running the numbers at a 24/7 to look at the patterns and the behaviors and what's happening. And so you can look at the devices, and I think you did an eloquent way of describing it. Like, is a device changing its pattern? Is a group of devices changing their patterns? Is what's happening with this account with that? And re-verification, I think, is also one of the ways that you will be able to do that. So we're employing very similar technologies and techniques to go after this, but we feel, like I said, there's a responsibility to also on the front end make that education, make that moment of something going bad as best as we can, stop it where we can. But this is all data. This is all information. This is like massive spreadsheets in the sky, just to be simple, that we are all running through constantly and trying to pick the pattern so that we can go find the evil, the darkness out there before it can occur. That's exactly as Andre described it.
Absolutely. But I think even for bunq especially, you've been one of the banks that has actually been proactive in not just utilizing data, but utilizing AI in onboarding processes and other things as well. So how are you currently utilizing or deploying? I doubt it's going to be spreadsheet, but it's probably.
Please know, everyone, that was a metaphor.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So how are you using AI now to help the
separate tables out there, right? So how is so fraud prevention. So there's an AI component to our fraud prevention, of course, because we're battling the AI components that sit on the outside. There is a AI component to KYC. There's an AI component to, really, we're a generative AI company, so there's an AI component to everything that we do. But I would sort of reel it all back to like getting started with who the user is. Who are they? Where do they come from? Not just when we talk about in this conversation, that's KYC. That's an internal bank conversation. But I mean, who are they? What do they want? Where are they headed? What are they trying to do? We're an entire bank built around a user, and our entire obsession and focus of all time is to what does the user need and what do they want. So we build everything. We make every decision, every feature, every expansion, everything we do is based on what the users are asking of us or what they want. So we have to gut check that, and then AI plays a role there. We also have AI as 97% of all of our customer support inquiries are answered through AI with a 90% plus satisfaction rate. That then gives us magnificent amounts of data that we can then turn back into these other conversations, right? So one of the advantages of having a sophisticated AI customer support ability is that is then data. It's not just a recorded conversation. It is an AI analyzed and capability that you can then recycle into proactive information to go and fight fraud with. So there's an upside to that. And I'll be honest, anybody who's running an institution like ours, this isn't something you do overnight. People don't just flip this on. Like we've been doing generative AI as a company for more than a decade, and there's a lot of mistakes that happened to get this to where it's at these satisfaction rates. So it is, you guys are in this industry. This is something it takes time to do right, and it can be done wrong, and you can still feel good about it. But you have to be able to capture this information and reuse it for prevention, and that's how we want everyone to feel safe and secure, and that is our responsibility.
Absolutely. And in Incognia, of course, like you're providing a solution, of course, to help with a lot of that. How are you utilizing AI? How has it helped you to evolve the company as well?
Yeah, well, pretty much everywhere. So from the device IDs that we generate using transformer-based architecture to how we predict what users are expected to do, and then we compare this to the real-time data to see okay, if there's a good match, the likelihood that this is the right person is higher, to AI assistants in which the users of our platform, the customers, they're able to, for example, run very big and sophisticated queries on what's going on, the anomalies in the data, identify new fraud patterns, etc. All the way to, for example, readjusting how each individual data feature is weighted in our models by basically talking to our system. So yeah, it's pretty much all over the place, helping both the customers, but also the underlying technology that helps us identify the users correctly is all powered by AI.
Absolutely. So it's more than just everybody uses AI very broadly, of course, but I've heard you talk about generative AIs, of course, in the chatbot, being able to take language and actually have responses, but then connecting that into your internal sources and helping customers to solve problems directly, to all the way to applying machine learning in different ways and going beyond that as well. Like maybe to sidetrack that a little bit as far as
I'd love to add to that.
no, go ahead.
So I do think it's important when people are listening to separate generative and agentic. Right? In terms of, let's just in all simple terms, if this is the first time you ever heard of it, generative is like, you give it a prompt, you give it some information, and it does something. Agentic is you've given it agency. So it has a set of, let's say, pre-decided behaviors or capabilities, and it's making a decision, it has agency. It's doing something on its own. I find, as a bank, we find agency, agentic capable AIs very good. I mean, AML, fraud prevention, you can really use these technologies there because your risk level of getting something wrong is you're actually out there in data trying to get something right. When it comes to, say, a user support or access to a user account, it's a very different story, right? This isn't something right now we're ready to just turn agents loose on. So we don't think that's the right time for that. But it can inform that data is collected and can inform what you can educate, talk about, and engage from a generative AI user support scenario. I know that's a little bit of what we would say at the U.S. inside baseball, but it is very much good to separate those two things. And then for anyone who talks about AI in our space, we should very much separate, and I think Andre will be with me on this, the lab and the factory. Because there is a lab where we're out token maxing, we're talking about how much we can do and how far AI can go. And then there's, I think, you and me, and we're running businesses on AI, right? So the day-to-day usage of this is running of the business, which is very much we're in the factory and we're delivering on a day-to-day basis, which isn't the perfect PR scenario, but it's the hard and difficult work of keeping people safe. Yep, I agree.
Absolutely. So maybe there's even that extension of that, right? And maybe a topic that nowadays at payments conferences, banking conferences here all the time, which is agentic commerce. So what are your views on agentic commerce? Because then all of a sudden we don't just have a user anymore. We don't have a person or a business person, but we have an agent on itself shopping with either a card or the access to the bank account.
Well, let's assume in a best case scenario that it's an agent with rules. But I think let's start with agentic commerce. So actually, I think of agentic commerce less in the way you do, which is sort of maybe an agent out shopping. I think of it as more as agent to agent commerce, right? So this is commerce that's passing between different agents. One's on one side, one's on another. And so this agentic commerce is actually happening, without humans being involved, because both of the agents have been given agency and they've been given rules that they play by. And I think in a best world scenario where the rules are set and those things, let's think I'm a lumber company and I sell 7 types of lumber and there's rules about what I sell and what the SKUs are. And then I'm a buyer and I have an inventory I have to keep and I have a budget. Well, that seems pretty simple. Maybe we could agentic that. The agent who says, here's my credit card, I want something new, that sounds like a bad idea to me. So I think there's rules that still have to be put in place. I think it's very brand new, but I do think it's an industry that's headed our way. And at one time or another, we will all have the same conversations we're having today about human fraud. And we will at some point, we will engage in, we have agentic fraud already, but an agent to agent fraud, let's say, we will have to find, we'll have to be smarter and better when the time comes. I just don't know exactly when that is.
Okay. And maybe for you, Andre, of course you have know your agents and all these different protocols that are being launched as well. How do you see that changing or maybe expanding your business when it comes to preventing that type of fraud as well?
Yeah, I'd say there are 2 challenges here, right? One is the know your agents, which I believe this one is more straightforward. Like each agent can have a cryptographic signature and you're able to authenticate it. That's all fine. The tricky part is establishing the connection between the agent and the user and doing that in a continuous way. Because what if that session is hijacked, right? What if I take over your account and your account has an agent that has, for example, your payment credentials and your login credentials to your bank account, for example? That could be a huge problem, right? So this part I'd say is the most challenging, and this is where we are acting more right now, which is finding ways to basically create a way to bind the end user to the agent continuously. the way we're doing it is by focusing on pretty much the same things that we do with other customers, which is focusing on the device and its location. And if anything changes here, we need to make sure that at least one of these two remains consistent. So for example, if it's the device that you always use and you always use to connect to that agent, that's all good. If it's a new device, the location behavior of that new device should match the old device. Otherwise, there's a risk that this is something else, someone else impersonating you, for example. So we focus on like looking into these two things specifically. And I'd say like at a higher level, it's thinking about like what is vulnerable today, and pretty much every signal to like represent a user in the digital world that can be faked by AI is no longer reliable. So for example, if you think about like remote biometric authentication, deepfakes are destroying that. Document verification, probably in 5 years, that's not going to happen anymore. OTPs, very easy to phish. Passwords, same thing, right? So all of these like digital signals are becoming less and less reliable over time. So we're taking an approach which is much more like about grounding the user's digital identity into physical reality, because that's probably the only thing that AI won't be able to fake. So that's what we're betting on.
Absolutely.
There's an opportunity. There's a technology opportunity here, right? This isn't so much a technical problem we can build if we know what to go after. It is a trust verification type of issue. So there's which leaves there's a technical gap for greater technologies to address the things that Andre just described. What is the next level of if he's going back to the old world? What's your address and are you at your address? What is the technology opportunity there? Is there something I don't know what it is, but I know there's something.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to look into the future always, and I'm a very upbeat and positive person when it comes to that. However, I think what we're seeing around us nowadays is very challenging, right? There's AI, of course, there's regulations also, not just in Europe, but also across the world, and other things are coming in that. What is something in maybe your perspective that you believe needs to change for at least, let's just keep it to APP fraud or fraud overall as a bank, that allows us to grow further, to do more transactions, to grow as businesses as well? What needs to change? Is that regulations? Is that the adoption to AI, adopted to stable coins? What might that be?
Ooh, there's a lot of ways we can go with this, and it sounds like I'm going to end on the same place I started, which is I think the opportunity on the human end is our challenge. I think a responsibility, not necessarily liability, but responsibility to develop the technologies and the capabilities to better secure the human end of a transaction. What does that mean? I mentioned Safety Shield a few times. Andre's mentioned some different ways that they do it, but I think we're exploring both in a different way. How we go and affect this, if I may say, weekend of the problem, in a sense. So I think what needs to change is, I think, it would be great if the whole world at the same time raised its acumen around how dangerous this is, but that probably won't happen, and we'll still make mistakes. So we have to be responsible to continue on a company by company basis to really educate and create technologies that can prevent people from making mistakes without, of course, handcuffing them, like, let's say, what happened to you on a completely legit transaction. So how do you balance between the two? I'm sure that we're going to still make some mistakes along the way, but I think that's the thing that needs to change, is we need to help people understand the breadth and the depth of this and provide technologies that are seamless so that they're not, stuck with nowhere to go and nothing to do about it.
Thank you very much. Now, how about you, Andre?
Yeah, I'd say my goal is to enable the financial institutions to get to a point in which they don't need to worry about educating their users about security anymore, because the tech is so good that they don't need to worry about that. So for example, think about account takeovers driven by social engineering, right? A lot of that was because OTPs was one of the main forms of multi-factor authentication. And an OTP can be easily phished, right? Like if someone is calling you, trying to impersonate the bank, and they're saying like, "Oh, I'm from the bank. We're going to receive a 6-digit code on your phone. please tell me that 6-digit code. Okay, I got your account, right? But if we're able to replace that with better technology, that the fraudster is not able to say like, oh, there's a code that you're going to receive, you shut down that door, right? So basically, like continuing to upgrade the technology to a point in which even the last like tech savvy user is still protected because like the tech is working for them. In the meantime, obviously we need to invest a lot in educating the users, but I believe you're going to agree with me. Sometimes it's frustrating, right? You try a lot.
How could it be possible?
And you're like, oh my God.
You can't, I can't believe someone did that. You guys have those conversations? It does, but I don't think it's a, you can't blame the victim here. Like it's still someone that's preying upon them, and we have to be smart enough to like understand who the bad guy and the good guys are here.
Yeah. So my goal is to like help the FIs get rid of this problem and not have to worry about running campaigns to educate their users anymore.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank the both of you for joining us here at Executive Conversations by the Paypers. Thank you very much.
Cheers, man. Thank you. Thanks, pleasure. Happy to be here.
If you like this episode, hit like, follow, and subscribe for more.